As you may know, Lake Mead's water levels are dropping, and fast. We've already fallen about 14 feet in the past year, and we stand around 1,054 feet above sea level as of July 2025. Projections indicate that we could still dip around 1,044 feet by the end of 2025. That's just a few feet above the historic low point reached in mid-2022. But what does this actually mean for this fishery? In this video, we're going to break down exactly how Lake Mead's falling water levels are affecting the fish, what's happening to their spawning areas, whether we might see a collapse in 2025, and why some experts say the worst could still be ahead. So stick around, because what's happening under the surface is more complex and more surprising than you may think. So first, let's talk about what we know is happening. When water levels drop, shallow coves and spawning areas shrink. These areas warm up faster under the sun, and warmer water holds less oxygen. Fish rely on dissolved oxygen to breathe through their gills, so less oxygen can stress them out or even cause die-offs. So is this a problem at Lake Mead? Well, yes, it's happening, but I wouldn't call it a severe issue. Lake Mead still gets a steady flow of oxygen-rich water from the Colorado River, which keeps conditions more stable and reduces the risk of major die-offs. Another effect of the falling water levels is the formation of isolated pools that dry out. This happens when shallow areas that were once connected to the main lake get cut off, turning into a stagnant and overheated pool. Once fish are trapped in these pools, they typically will dry out and die. If you're a Vegas local and you were here in 2022, you might remember when Boulder Harbor closed due to low water levels. Now keep in mind, this is from 2022. As of 2025, we haven't seen anything on this same scale. As shown in the graph, the rate of the water decline in 2025 is much lower. Now, pools are still drying up. Even though the drop is slower, some areas are still becoming isolated and fish are dying. For example, this was shown in a recent Sin City Outdoors video where they came across an isolated pool and they saved some fish before they died. So yes, it's still happening, but here's the real question. Is this going to affect Lake Mead in a big way? The die-offs that happen in these pools, are they the reason you won't catch your next PB? Is this going to significantly hurt the fishery? Honestly, probably not. Most of these die-offs happen in small, disconnected areas. The main body of Lake Mead still has plenty of deep water, oxygen flow from the Colorado River, and healthy fish populations. While it's sad to see any fish lost, these isolated events aren't likely to cause a major collapse of the fishery. These are obvious impacts happening to Lake Mead right now, but there are also less visible effects. Just like these isolated pools, shallow spawning areas are experiencing a similar problem. So here's a question I couldn't shake. We know that game fish, or most freshwater fish, like to spawn in shallow water. With the water levels dropping so fast, will the receding shoreline catch up where these fish spawn and wipe out an entire generation? In order to answer this, we need to understand how fast the water is falling by looking at the rate in which the water levels fell in 2025 and 2022. If you didn't know, 2022 was the fastest drop Lake Mead has ever experienced. 2022 was by far our worst year, and you can see from March 6th to June 11th, the water dropped about 21 feet, or roughly 0.22 feet per day. Looking at the graph for 2025, from March 6th to June 11th, the lake dropped about 13 feet over 97 days, which works out to around 0.13 feet per day. So, although the water level is falling now in 2025, it was almost twice as bad in 2022. So, how does this look for spawning areas? For largemouth bass in Lake Mead, they generally spawn in water between 2 to 10 feet deep, while smallmouth bass tend to prefer 5 to 15 feet. Largemouth bass eggs hatch between 2 to 4 days, and then the males guard the fry for another 10 days, totaling around 14 days. During that 2-week window, if we took 2025, the water will drop about 1.8 feet, and in 2022 it will drop about 3 feet. Because largemouth bass could spawn in 2 feet of water, a 1.8 foot drop could leave nests exposed, and a 3-foot drop would leave some nests exposed to dry out. But most spawning bass would probably be fine, since they also spawn in deeper waters up to 10 feet. For smallmouth bass, their eggs take about 5 to 10 days to hatch, with another week of guarding, so about 17 days total for the longest scenario. So given a 17-day time frame in 2025, the water dropped around 2.2 feet, while in 2022, it dropped nearly 4 feet, which does not pass the 5-foot threshold. So this would not leave smallmouth bass high and dry, but it could cause their spawning areas to be in warmer water. But just like the largemouth bass, they also use deeper areas to spawn up to 15 feet, so most bass would be fine. Now, crappie are similar. They typically spawn in water about 3 to 8 feet deep, with their eggs hatching in about 3 to 5 days, and their fry are guarded for another 4 days, making it 9 days total. That means in 2025, their nest saw a drop of about 1.2 feet, and in 2022, about 2 feet. Which, like the smallmouth bass, this drop would not leave crappie high and dry. Now, tilapia are a bit different. They typically spawn in water about 1 to 6 feet deep, but what makes them unique is that they're mouth brooders. So this means that they can actually hold their eggs and their fry in their mouths for up to 2 weeks and move them around if the water levels change. So even though the lake saw a drop of about 1.8 feet in 2025 and close to 3 feet in 2022, tilapia can easily adapt by relocating their young. Many anglers don't like tilapia because they compete with bass for shallow spawning habitats, but they're among one of the most resilient fish to falling water levels when it comes to protecting their offspring. Finally, let's talk about striped bass, which are actually pretty interesting because they spawn using suspended, free-floating eggs that drift in the water currents, similar to what happens in the ocean. Striped bass are originally ocean fish, so their spawning methods are completely normal for that environment, which is why they are so different from the fish in Lake Mead that need shoreline to spawn. So, are Lake Mead's fish really facing a collapse in 2025? Well, as I outlined earlier, the fish will see some downsides, but the short answer is no. With most species, some of their spawning could be affected, especially with those nesting right at the shallowest edge of their preferred range. But overall, most fish will still be spawning deep enough that the falling water levels won't have a major impact on them this year. Juvenile and adult fish will continue to adapt and move with the water just like they have done before. But if we look back at 2022, conditions were actually worse. The water dropped more rapidly, and it reached even lower record levels, around 1,040 feet above sea level. Despite that, there wasn't a massive fish collapse, and that shows that Lake Mead's fish communities, while stressed, are able to adapt as long as there are some shallow habitats that exist. Now, we might not see a dramatic change in the fish population this year, but that doesn't mean the fishery is safe in the long run. Year after year, the declining water levels can take a toll. According to the USGS, lower water levels reduce the number of shallow coves, which have aquatic vegetation and cover that are preferred by spawning habitats for largemouth bass. In simple terms, lower lake levels means fewer spawning areas, so fewer bass being born and the population declines. And that's an obvious downside of long-term water loss, but here's where it actually gets interesting. Short-term water level drops, followed by a recovery, can actually help. Let me explain. When a reservoir like Lake Mead drops, the total water volume shrinks, and the fish get forced into a smaller area. Instead of being scattered throughout the lake, bass and baitfish, like shad, become more concentrated. That means the odds of finding actively feeding fish can actually go up. In fact, fishery experts have noted that during low water periods, bass often feed more aggressively on shad, packing on more weight and improving their overall health. So yes, fishing can actually get better, but of course, this improvement is usually in the short term, because if the water stays low for too long, the fishery will actually be negatively affected, like for spawning, for example. Another potential benefit of fluctuating water levels is the exposed lake bed that gets plenty of sunlight, which triggers new vegetation to grow in the area. You'll often see grass and shrubs just spring up. Check out this photo from 2022 when this iconic boat resurfaced. Fresh vegetation can be seen everywhere. Now, once this vegetation goes underwater, it creates the ideal habitat for bait fish, small fish, and game fish like bass. It can improve food availability, oxygen levels, and overall fish health, almost like giving the lake a fresh start. Now, sometimes we do see benefits from fluctuating water levels, but more often we don't, especially in years like 2022, where the water level dropped drastically and didn't recover. And unfortunately, this trend seems to be continuing. In fact, Lake Mead has dropped over 160 feet in elevation in the last 20 years, with 20 of those feet lost in 2022 alone. Lake Mead was once known as a fisherman's paradise, and I still hope it can be again. But if the water levels recede year after year, that dream feels further out of reach. This video took some time to put together, so if you enjoyed it, please let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Until next time.